Good morning, happy Sunday, or whatever day it is where you are. Last time we talked about Zechariah had two staffs. He was talking about false shepherds and the tools of a foolish shepherd. And he had the staff of union and the staff of favor, right? So how the union between Judah and Israel, the northern and southern kingdoms, was broken and still has been broken for 3,000 years from this time. And the favor of being in the land, right? It's God's favor. He favors Israel, so he's going to put them in his land. And we know throughout Zechariah that the land is going to be destroyed and purified to make way for the new Jerusalem and this new temple, right? So all these other temples, we're in the second temple now, and it's not looking so pretty, right? It's not the best looking temple. Herod's going to fix it up, make it look grand again, probably bigger than any of the other temples, even King Solomon's temple. And even Herod will carve out more land of Israel than any other king. So a lot of people could look at him and be like, oh, he's the Messiah. I'm sure the Sadducees, a few Sadducees would say such things, because he did play the part. But it wasn't true. It wasn't the Messiah that they really wanted. Even when Jesus came, they wanted a Messiah who was going to free them from the Romans, right? Take power, be the king, because that's what was promised, right? They didn't make this up in their minds. They didn't understand this suffering servant concept. It was completely foreign to them. It's in there when you look for it, right? But the promise was always like Moses, man, like there's a prophet like me who's going to come, be greater than me, which he was, and he's going to reign, rule, and be your king, right? Israel's never supposed to have a human king. This king priest, this Melchizedek, only Jesus could fulfill that role. So we're talking about a Hebrew letter. I don't think I could remember it, but I put it in the comment section, or in the description of the last video. And so Yod we have is hand, or does the work. And we have Samek, it's hand on staff, this encompassing, this protection. And then we have Lamed, which is, just to goad or to guide, instruct, if you will. So we have all these three concepts. Jesus being the hand who did the great work. We have the staff, which I think is a good picture of his law, because it protects you, it guides you, and it gives you blessing or cursing on if you're walking within it. And that's, if you do those things and you stay close to God, then you are in his presence, and there's this staff that guides you. And we have these two pictures of these shepherd staffs here, this union and favor, that I think fit well into this. And then we have the tools, the equipment of a foolish shepherd or a false shepherd, because Zechariah is dealing with these several guys who are leading the people astray. And it says, who care not, they're be destroying, they're eating the young, they're even tearing off the hooves and being like, look, the wolves are out there, the wolves are eating our young. Warmongering and not actually lifting up and guiding and instructing in truth, but instructing with fear and consuming, eating their young. So let's move on here. Chapter 12. The oracle of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretched out the heavens, founded the earth, and formed the spirit of man within him. Spirit of man, sorry. I'm like, spit, that's weird. Spirit of man within him. Behold, I am about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. And on that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it. On that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. But for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open. When I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness, And the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts their God. So you might be saying, well, is this referring to 586, right? When the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. It's talking about every nation, and it's talking about Judah winning, right? And everyone being struck with blindness. This hasn't happened. And when has Jerusalem become a heavy stone for all people? We're starting to see a glimmer of that now, right? It's always in the news, and what's everything just like focused on? It's Jerusalem and the Islamic world, and people are using the Jews in Jerusalem for these Zionistic efforts. Zionism isn't bad. My Zionism is, I'm focusing on New Zion versus Old Zion, right? And that was the problem in 70 AD was Zionism focused on the earth, right? On that current Herod's temple, on that land. But the staff of favor had been broken. They knew they were going to get kicked out of the land. They knew a heavenly kingdom was coming. They knew a heavenly king was coming, and he wasn't there. And they were fighting and dying. 1 million dead, 1 million into slavery, according to Josephus. But not even that is what this is talking about. This is talking about a future event. There's stuff in context, but there's no true fulfillment of this right there. Let's keep going. On that day I will make the clans of Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of wood, like a flaming torch among sheaves. They shall devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. Interesting phrase, right? Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. And the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, and the house of David, and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. On that day the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. And on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me and on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him, as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him, as one weeps over a firstborn. On that day the mourning at Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad Raman in the plain of Megiddo. The land shall mourn, each family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, and the family of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Levi by itself, and the house and their wives by themselves, and the family of the Shemaites by itself, and their wives by themselves, and all the families that are left, each by itself, and their wives by themselves. On that day shall be a fountain opening for the house of David, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. And we have this fountain being talked about before, and I think later in Revelation, this great river goes out. I think in chapter 14 it talks about as well. River of life going out from the city of Jerusalem. Oh, we don't have this, right? This never happened. Right? When does this ever happen? I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace, a pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on whom they have pierced, they shall mourn him, as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him, as one weeps over a firstborn. It's hard not to say that's Judah, those in Judaism, seeing and recognizing Messiah. I don't know what else they're seeing Jerusalem, and that's not wrong, because right, Messiah's going to come down. I believe he's going to come down riding on a giant city, right? He's bringing his city with him. He's not coming down and leaving. He's not having a little rapture event that we believe in, right? This harpaxos event that Tim LaHaye has described. My rapture event is the city starts coming down, the world sees it. There's your first resurrection, the dead in Christ rise, go to the city. Those who are still believers, who have survived the tribulation, there's about to be the 7 days of wrath, where the land is Israel's destroyed. They are raptured. They're called to that city. It's not in heaven. It's in the sky. It's coming down. You're not going to be living with the angels up there in a land that you weren't supposed to live. Right? You're being taken to the land, to the city. That's the rapture. It's very quick. It's just a few days of wrath and destruction. Then you're going to live 1,000 years on the earth. All these nations are going to come against this city. This is what it's talking about. All these people living in this great city. And the nations are going to come. They're going to war against it. There's some nations. And it's going to talk about nations coming to celebrate the feasts. To give tribute. To acknowledge this is the true king. So there'll be a sheep and goats judgment after this millennial reign where it's like, you were faithful. You believed. You came to the city. You celebrated the feasts. You recognized Messiah. And then there'll be a great final battle when the devil is loosed again. And then the judgment, the resurrection unto death. Those in Sheol who never believed are destroyed. Those on the earth that resisted and fought shall be destroyed. Because there's no gray area there against Messiah or you're with him. Let's read some of the notes today because I felt like that was short. Kind of straight to the point. Zechariah's not doing any weird things like casting silver into the potter's house, which I don't know what that means. 12. Cup. Reeling. The Hebrew expression cup of reeling is used in Isaiah 51:17 and 22. Take a little glance there. 51:17. Wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem. You have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath. You have drunk to the dregs the bold cup of staggering. Isaiah is prophesying before the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. But here in the text, actually, the bowl speaks of a bowl, saf, rather than a cup. It is possible that the author chose the word bowl in order to execute a wordplay. The Hebrew word saf also means threshold, just as the drink from a vessel could cause drunkenness and stumbling. A threshold could easily cause stumbling because a part of the threshold was raised above level ground. The threshold consisted of a large stone slab that featured sockets on each end, into which the door pivots were fitted. Through large gates would have separate sockets into the ground. The door would close against the protruding threshold. This threshold slab could also then be the immovable rock. I'm immediately thinking, okay, instead of a cup, it's a bowl. These people are going to make a grander mistake than even those living before the 586 destruction were making. They're going to live in error even farther. They're going to take God's word and twist it even more. Behold, that's what we all do. Every generation, we just get worse. We do, right? There are those who get reformed and see light, but as a whole, Christianity, Judaism as a whole, it's consistently moving away from God, right? It's hard to see much revival these days. I like the threshold idea. Everything goes. I feel like it's always talking about the temple. There's always some sort of reference to the temple in Zechariah. So this threshold could be this uneven threshold. Just this temple isn't truly not honoring God, and it's becoming a stumbling block. And how's the temple becoming a stumbling block? Just what I talked about in 70 AD. It was such a stumbling block for Israel because they were so focused on this is our God, this is our temple, we have to defend it. God will defend it. He's not going to let his temple be destroyed, but he already did. Already did. And it's going to happen again. And so many died thinking they were dying righteously. And Josephus was trying to lead them into truth, and they were not willing to listen. Heavy stone. If the word translated cup in verse 2 is doing double duty as reference to the threshold, then this would likely refer to the threshold slab as an integral part of the gate structure. The threshold stone would probably be dislodged when the gates were destroyed. This would be a prime objective for a besieging army. Tearing down gates is mentioned in Neo-Babylonian texts, but the taking up of the threshold is not specifically referred to. A Sumerian lament over Eridu reports that the doorframe was ripped out. Akkadian texts describe the high grade of stone that was used, and the function of these slabs served as a foundation for both gates and walls. When Sennacherib destroyed Babylon, he tore out the foundations of temples and walls and threw them into the canal. Temple thresholds were often inscribed with prayers for protection. So Sennacherib was the Assyrian king, right? When the Syrian Empire was strong, and then conquered Babylon, and Babylon rose in strength and helped conquer Assyria later. The morning of Hadad Raman in the plain of Megiddo. Both Hadad and Raman were names for West Semitic storm gods that some Canaanite texts relate to Baal. The only time they appear in a compound form is here. As a consequence, many have taken the morning to refer to some ritual morning festival associated with the death and return of a Canaanite deity. But it would be very strange for the prophet to be using an idolatrous ceremony to illustrate an event that caused deep sorrow. Others have noted that the mourning is not over Hadad Raman, so possibly the name is of a place or town. The mourning may be connected to the sense of loss the community experienced when Josiah was killed in battle on the plain of Megiddo. A lament that was made into a tradition. Unfortunately, we do not know if the tradition was still being observed in the Persian period. So Josiah was the one good king. He was killed by the Egyptians, which seemed kind of strange death, a useless death almost. But he had done great things and lived righteously and found the Torah in the temple that was, had been, I don't think it was destroyed, it had been stripped by Sennacherib, a lot of the precious elements. And he found the Torah in there, and he had it read, and he tore down the high places and instructed people in good living again. So this might be something that Zechariah would mention. The Baal cycle is very interesting. All these characters, of a dying and resurrecting character, and it has much to do with growth and farming and agriculture. They would have sex in front of these gods in their temples because they believed that when the gods had sex, that's what the rain was, and then the growth from the earth resulted of that. So that's why you do have a lot of temple prostitutes being referred to, if you never understood that before. So mourning would happen if there was a drought in the land. So it could be something like that. A lack of food, lack of rain. Remember, the prophets of Baal, there's a lack of rain, and they're cutting themselves, and they're trying to incite Baal and his wife. And Elijah was able to bring down fire, right? So David and Levi are recognizable as the royal and priestly lines. Respectively, Nathan and Shimei are more difficult, that there are numerous individuals in the Bibles with those names, since Nathan is one of the sons of David, and Shimei is the grandson of Levi. Many see in these verses a reference to clans and subclans. Also of interest is the possibility that all of these clans have a relationship to Zerubbabel. He descends from David through Nathan and through Levi. And Zerubbabel's brother's name is Shimei. Interesting, and we've been talking about Zerubbabel, right? He's the kind of like governor at this time. And then we have Yahushua, right? Joshua, Jesus, if you want to think about it that way. If we were to transliterate it today, it'd be Jesus. But it's Joshua. I don't care. I'm not a sacred namer. I'm just saying. It's interesting because there's so many references to Messiah here. We have this high priest that's supposed to be taking up this mantle here, leading these stubborn people, and there's all these false shepherds around. And so we have this idea of king priest. You can go watch the other videos, of course, or read the other texts, and watch the videos. Do what you want, but you'll see that there's references to the temple, the future temple, high priest, the future high priest, and now the future king, right? Because we have Jesus becoming high priest, probably acting in a Melchizedekian role since his creation. Now he has come back, acting as our high priest, and then he will come back again, being our high priest and king. 2 more chapters to go. We can get through this. If anyone has any questions or just thoughts or corrections for me, definitely comment, and have a wonderful day.